as Bob Malone. And it's this occasion is special for me because I was down there my second time, about his fifth, in 1963-64, except I never got to see him. We went south, but he and his party went to North Victoria Land before we arrived, and they weren't back until after we'd been back. And that was a great dog sledge journey with Group 8 that surveyed many thousands of square kilometres of North Victoria Land. But he was notable for a whole range of reasons. He was, he had a history as a surveyor, both nationally and internationally, and he chaired the Ross Dependency Research Committee after once the program was established and going beyond the IGY. And he's just one of these understated but people who got things done. Planning that first 7-year survey of the Ross Dependency was really significant and largely due to Bob. But today we're going to hear about a different sort of exploration. It's quite a history based in Wellington. A couple of young students that I remember were key to this. Both did honours, masters. One didn't do a PhD, the other did, but it was on radiolaria, which doesn't seem too related to drilling. But Jeff is quite a diverse character, as you'll find out. So he'll be talking to us tonight about 50 years of drilling, some in Antarctica, some beyond. He might make a passing reference to his fellow mate, who couldn't be here this evening. And it was always difficult to get to talk. Well, not entirely true. It depends on the circumstances. Alex Pine, of course, is a great character in the drilling world. Tonight we hear from Jeff and his stories. So, Jeff, please.
Thank you, Peter. It's always interesting, these things. Georgia first asked me to sort of do something for the Antarctic Society, I think about a year and a half ago now, with COVID and various things. And isn't it amazing how when you'd known about something for a year and a half and you actually only finish the presentation a couple of hours before you're due to come on. But that's the way of the world nowadays. I was in a bit of a quandary as to how to approach this, because there's a lot of chronology that sort of overlaps between Antarctica and what we've done overseas. And I thought that the best way around it was to perhaps just go with a very brief background to the whole system and how we've got down there and what actually happened. Some of our Antarctic exploits that we did down there, and then where's it taken Webster Drilling? Where have we gone with this? And finally, just where to from here, fairly. The first one's pretty brief. The second one, the last one's pretty brief, but it's the morphing of the two. There's a bit of backwards and forwards between the other two. So, James Holmes Miller, born February 1919, survey cadet, went through World War II, and the Fiordland excursions after World War II were probably his first foray into the remote areas. And by the mid-1950s, he was off to the ice. And this was at about the time Bain Webster was born in 1950. I was in 1956. So Joe was going around doing his thing in Antarctica when we were very young. Then we enter into the era of the Dry Valleys drilling project, and the first hole that was done in 1973 was a shakedown hole at McMurdo, and Bain Webster was actually on that hole. And it's quite ironic, or quite good, that it's 50 years since he was down there, and he's still very much involved with what's happening nowadays on the drilling scene. So there were those early days down there, the days of Jack Hoffman and that, and getting everything together after the IGY. The pictures out here, this is Lake Vander, I think, was that Don Juan Pond? Might be Lake Vander. And that came about 2 or 3 years after the initial shakedown at McMurdo. Old Longyear 44 rig, and bits of it is still around today. There's one character, Pat Cooper, wants to get his hands on it to restore it. We might just give it to him. Myself, I did in the mid-70s and 80s, 3 years of undergraduate at Victoria University. And then I took a year off and went engineering, bit of mucking around, and then came back having a family and did 9 years of postgraduate. And as Peter said, I was into radiolaria. And that was in the days of Norcott Hornibrook, DSIR, and they were really good. George Scott, good days in micropower. Very buoyant days. There was a lot of oil exploration sort of starting up, and the micropaleontology was coming into play for dating a lot of the sequences that they were drilling through. So yeah, I completed in 1986 late Neogene radiolaria from the east coast of Thorn Belt, New Zealand. That was about the last time I ever looked down a microscope, apart from just some personal little interest and stuff in that. Much to the chagrin, I think, of Norcott, I never really published much from it. But anyway, I was caught in the late 80s when the DSIR was starting to implode a bit. There was a lack of jobs in the soft rock sector in oil. It was starting to go a bit of a decline there. And so I actually was making wind spinners for a while out of old bits of Remu and doing bits and pieces. But I essentially spent 10 years in the consulting industry. And I sort of, perhaps I shouldn't have. I remember my first job with Petrichor. Christine said to me, how are you going to do this? You've not really been in that industry for that long. And I said, I'm just going to have to work my way through it. And so I did. And yeah, and that's where I started to get into the logistics of oil exploration. And I found it quite fascinating. We were starting to move into some helicopter seismic in Taranaki, and it was all really neat stuff. And so that's when I started to get to know Bain. And in 1995, I joined up with Bain as a co-director and with another guy, Peter Rutland, and away we went as Webster Drilling. So some of the Antarctic exploits. Now, I don't expect you to read all this and look at it. Of course, it's up there for a reason. We have a mega spreadsheet going that we're sort of filling in, and it's to do with who the project was for. This is all the drilling we can find in the Ross Sea region, who the project was for, who was the principal scientist, what did they actually do, and we're just compiling all this. Anyway, what I've done there with that column is I've colour-coded it to Webster Drilling having people involved as yellow, and Webster Drilling having the contract as green. And you can see the progression through time where from IGY down to Webster Drilling being formed, of course, there was people involved. Alex and Jeff sort of arrived on the scene in the 1980s, and there is a bit of a side story there in that the relationship I had with Alex when we were in our very small honours class of 4 grew, and Alex and I have always been involved with one another, sometimes to the point of arguing a fair bit, but it's been good for me to be a scientist on the drilling side because I've been able to relate to the drillers, some of whom are pretty rough, and relate to them what we're actually trying to do. And that's always been a good point for us in that we've been able to foster that within the company. And I've been able to tell them the reason why some of the science is being done. So anyway, as you can see, we've gradually just picking up a lot of this work down there. And so the yellow changes to green as we get further and further down the track. We're probably missing some. This is a retirement program, filling in the spreadsheet. So consequently, it's going to take a few more years yet. We still can't manage to retire. But anyway, I think we may be missing a few of the Waikato University drilling program stuff, but we'll gradually get it all in there. And there's some amazing work that Alex has done recently on collating some of this stuff. So that's the progression from Webster Drilling being involved with people to Webster Drilling being involved on a contract basis. And some of these contracts, you've got to remember, they weren't very lucrative for a commercial company. We've found over the years that quite often you have to go for your Marsden funding 2-3 years hence. And by the time the money comes through and it's pared back a little bit, sometimes we have had to sort of chip in by way of extending people's stay down there and stuff like that, maybe not charging for the last hole, blah-de-blah. And just there's been compromises all the way through, but there's been a reward for us. There's been a distinct reward in that some of the subsequent contracts we've got in places like Iran and Turkey against big international companies, very, very lucrative seismic contracts and that, were because, well, these guys have been to Antarctica, remote location experience, and that's what's dragged us into some of those locations. So anyway, here's the same spreadsheet again, but this time with the next column. The yellow is science, purely science. We're working on a science project. And as you can see, right down to 2000, it was just about all science. Then in 2000, there started to be an inkling of the geotechnical work coming in, environmental work, cleanup from old drilling campaigns. I'll mention that later on. So that's in green. So we've got the yellow there, which is the science. Then we start picking up a lot of green. Then there was a period in that pinky colour there where we started to do a lot of seismic for the big science programs, pre-Andrew seismic and stuff like that. A little bit of ice coring smattered in there in blue. And as you can see over time, the science is still dominated, but the geotech side of it is starting to creep in a lot more now and perhaps outweigh the science side from our perspective, from our drilling programs. So that's that. Now with Antarctica, seismic was a big one, as I mentioned, and there were generally 2 forms of seismic that we did there. One was out on the ice shelf, where we were drilling about 18 metres into the firn, and that's this one here, where we're out on the ice shelf. And this here is the air gun seismic that was out on the annual sea ice, where we were drilling a larger diameter hole for them to pop an air gun down and just measure the recording. Exactly the same principles with the oil as in the oil exploration, but this was site survey work for the science. You'll notice as I go through that those rigs, they just crop up all the time. There was modularity we were building into those rigs that gave them a versatility that it's quite unique. Recently, we've been over to Palmer Station, doing some geotechnical work there for the new wharf, going in through San Diego, and once again, the same sort of modular rig was being used. We're taking them down to about 40, 50 metres doing geotech on the way coring. In Antarctica, we've sort of adapted things and changed things depending on the circumstances. Here we made a half tent to protect everybody in a particularly windy situation. And then, of course, we're starting to do geotechnical at Scott Base. That started quite a while ago, actually, for various engineering companies, and we've amassed a bit of detail. As for the core that comes out, that's gone back to front, that one. But anyway, it's quite unique coring this stuff, coring the permafrost. And that's where Alex came into it a lot, Cold Climate Research Institute. Coring the permafrost is quite difficult in the respect that as soon as we hit the ice, when you compress air, you heat it up. And so as soon as we were using compressed air, what was happening was the ice was melting. So we actually were taking refrigerators down, or refrigerant coolant packages down, so we would compress the air, then refrigerate it, get it down the whole cold, and it would do its job that way. And that was just all a development over time that Alex was heavily involved with us. So, yeah, and that's working particularly well, that technique. And now when the geotechnical people are seeing this sort of core, they're really rapt. Couple there. This is Vida here, and we took an old minerals rig down there. Bain was involved in that hole. And in the days before the environmental, let's put it, we used to drill with diesel down there. And some of these holes still had the diesel in. And Raytheon Services at the time were involved with McMurdo a fair bit. And they wanted to start cleaning some of these up. So we took an old minerals rig down there. It's just a small one. Just ran casing down, got the diesel out of the holes, and then the irony is that Bain drilled them with diesel, and then our company came along about 20 years later and cleaned them out, which is he's always sort of thought was a bit of... Yeah. The other one here, this is... that's University Hill, isn't it, Peter? Is it?
Sure.
I think that was for Nebraska. We did one for Nebraska. I'll find out. But I'm pretty sure that's University Peak or University Hill. Could be. Yeah. We'll find out. Yeah, so some of the places we're going to, but once again, the only way we could get there, helicopter, everything's modular. So yeah, it works well, that whole system. And I'll get a little bit more into that later on about how that system evolved. Of course, in 2006, 2007, wasn't it? Andrew and myself and Bain and Peter went to Oxford 10 years, I think, before that. There on holiday. It took about 5 years, something, when that first pre-Andrew meeting. It took a long time to get that, kick that off. Our involvement 1 year was just providing people, mud system. The rig is still owned by the University of Nebraska, and it's unfortunate really because it's now back in Christchurch and it needs some cosmetic work done to it. But it's still a very, very good rig there, and there is probably applications for it. And we're actually getting involved with with the ICDP regarding caldera drilling, and we may be able to utilise that rig on that work that's coming up in 2 or 3 years' time. But Andrew was of course a flagship. The core recovery was great. It was just, it went beyond everybody's dreams, I think. So we were involved in that on a sort of to the side of it. The coring there was great. We set up the coring systems, or with help with Alex, and we would give them advice and that. And as I said, providing the drillers. Ice coring, we sort of got involved in the early days with Nancy. Erebus Saddle was one of the, I think, yeah, well, that's Erebus Saddle there, isn't it? And Tony Kingan and Glenn Kingan got involved with that. This was in the days when the ice coring systems tended to not be able to work below about 180 metres, I think it was. It was the physical properties of the ice meant that it started to break up. And Darcy, of course, has done a lot more work since then and got through that problem. But this was in the days when we were just starting to come across this problem. Others have probably come across it before, but yeah, it was definitely a problem. Free Sills was probably our latest foray. Down there with Richard and Tim Nash, Richard Levy and Tim Nash. Once again, it's the same rig, same modular system, same coolants and everything required to keep the core coming. And as everybody does down there, there's we're not going anywhere.
Oh, it's a sports, yeah.
Yep, I know.
Every source is really special because people compressed together.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's I think the good thing about it, I'm just sort of going to flick through a few pictures here, and it's always amazes me. And what makes me so happy and pleased is that we've had so many people go down through us. We always had a point of sending one new guy and somebody who'd been before. And at one stage, we had 26 people on the staff who'd been to the ice. And there's so many people that have come through that system that are able to show these sorts of pictures to their grandchildren and stuff like that. And it really is a neat thing to be able to give some of these guys the chance to get down there and give them that experience. Things are a little bit changing nowadays with some of the people, but anyway. So there's lots of other projects that could have gone on and on and on, but what I'm sort of going to try and, this is going back a little bit, is where has it taken us as in Webster Drilling? We're general drilling contractors. We do a bit of everything. Not so much on the mineral side, not so much on the water side, but we love the small geotechnical helicopter type stuff. And we're it's 1983. It was first formed, based in Porora, still based in Porora. We've actually got quite a good story. We were doing a job for Conoco in Papua New Guinea, and the guy in charge, we used to call him Conoco Joe, he came up one day and he says, you guys must have most amazing setup in Wellington, and yeah, what have you, yeah, that's amazing. It's great that you're bringing all this gear over and it works and we're getting things done. And at that stage, we were working out of Bain's Skyline garage behind his house. So I turned around to Conoco Joe and I said, yeah, we have got quite a good setup. We're working out of the Skyline Towers in Partanui, just out of Wellington. We've actually got all floors of the Skyline Towers. And he said, I knew you'd be like that. I knew it. And anyway, so Conoco Joe. The first major contracts that we had were in Taranaki seismic exploration. And from that, there was a global expansion into sort of niche markets around the world. In a lot of places. And it sort of started with seismic, and then we adapted the rigs for geotech, and yeah, it all evolved gradually. And when we look back, this isn't something that we got a whiteboard out and did a business plan or anything like that. But 97 million barrels of oil a day were being produced globally back in the time when we got going. And 50,000 of that was in New Zealand. And that's when McKee was going pretty well. We're being in the early 2000s. So we looked at these numbers, sort of New Zealand's market share was only 0.5%. We sort of looked at the amount of money we were making just out of playing in that Taranaki field. And so holistically, looking back, no great business plan to go forward. We thought, let's have a go somewhere out there. And at that stage, we had just started moving from the difficult terrain, the easy country in the dairy, and we'd moved into sort of East Taranaki, where there's a lot of helicopter seismic. Petrocorp had a fleet of their own rigs, and then we started coming in with ours. We operated Petrocorp's rigs for a while. And then we sort of developed our own rigs, and we thought we'd give it a crack. So the Taranaki seismic, it started with tractors, old tractors, cobbled together an old water well rig and go out there. And then in 1989, the largest 3D land seismic that had been done in the world at that time was done over Kapuni. And we built some tractor rigs there that was tiltable masts and everything. We had to do 96,000 holes under shell too. Oh, heaven forbid. They brought all their guns out from the Netherlands, and oh man, they were hard to deal with, some of these guys. But anyway, we managed to get through it all. In fact, they kept on wanting us to build more rigs, but we showed them that we didn't have to in the end. So we moved from that. The rigs evolved a little bit, not much, changed a little bit in some respects. And then now, of course, today they're festooned with safety gear and guards and everything like that. So that was the Taranaki seismic, and that seismic, it wasn't just Taranaki. We were actually starting to do seismic at that stage for things like the Alpine Fault. This was Gaunt Creek years ago. We're doing some seismic there just for science before the drilling of the Alpine Fault at Gaunt Creek, quite a few years beforehand. And then we moved into PNG with the rigs. We started off with these just small handheld rigs, and then we started to get into some of the bigger country, and we went to our modular system again with what we call the HPP 150 rig. And they could be broken down by hand and moved around, or a small helicopter could lift them up in one piece. So there was a lot there. When we started in PNG, we used to fly over the karst country and just off the highlands. And we used to say, oh, God, don't anybody ever let us drill down in there. And of course, the people in Houston that were drawing the maps on the lines didn't have a sort of a knowledge of what was beneath some of this country. And then we ended up doing a lot of work through the karst country in the PNG highlands, 200-foot jungle that just made the country underneath it look smooth, but you got down in there and man, it was diabolical. But we did it all, and we did it all without a couple of broken legs and things like that. But it was pretty head spinning stuff, some of that. And people, there was sort of ExxonMobil and Chevron were moseying around in PNG, and they sort of noticed, and they started saying, you know, you guys should go to other places. And we said, oh, get control of this one first. We better make sure we can do these ones. But anyway, we carried on, and we ended up in Iran doing work, quite a bit of work there. And this was at the time when the Iranians were starting to run out of oil on their flatland around NZAS and places like that, Maidan, and they were starting to move into the Zagros Mountains. Now, the Zagros Mountains in Iran are the end of the Himalayas essentially coming through. And they are amazing. It's an amazing country. It's a biblical country. It's just bizarre. And that was incredible working in there. And this was in Iran. That's not cloud in the background there, that's snow. And we were getting up really high. And I loved the tanks, though. That was during just after the Iran-Iraq war. The Iranians went in along the main highway from the border going into Tehran. They built all these pedestals, and they put blowing up Iraqi tanks on all these pedestals along the main road going in towards Tehran. And it was just a thing as if to say, don't you dare come down this road again. And they're still there today. These old Iraqi tanks that have been just blowing up. And anyway, lovely people, really, really neat people. 99% of the people in these places, all they want to do is put shoes on their kids' feet, get them to school, same as us, same as everybody, same as humanity. There's just 1% of twerps in some of these countries that ruin it. But anyway, it really was amazing working in there. We actually had Iranian helicopter pilots, which were a little bit so-so, but this here is a case of getting one of the modular rigs and just extending the mast, because every now and then in seismic, you might be drilling a whole line at 15 metres. They want a couple of 50, 60-metre holes just to do some calibration work. And we would do these upholes with an adapted rig. And that was just the same sort of rig that was just adapted for that purpose. So yeah, Iran, and this is the country, and there was just amazing, just really, really neat. And it was so different moving there from New Guinea, because the country was the same in New Guinea, except here you could see it. It wasn't covered in jungle. Turkey, that was 2012, I think it was. We were working, it was about an hour's flight, Diyarbakir, in from Istanbul, in towards the Iraqi border. And there was, they have quite a few oil fields in there. but once again, they were starting to move into the more difficult terrain. So they needed sort of the portability of the little helicopters and of the little helicopter rigs. We put a few tractor rigs at that one as well. We always said we should adapt the rig to go on donkeys because that would have been a godsend there, and we would have been able to move them around and everything. And but that sort of happened after the fact. There's just donkeys everywhere. But Turkey being Turkey, this is Mustang helicopters, and you might notice that there that actually has the number 1 beside it. And there is 10. Those are bullet holes. And we actually got a little bit too close to the PKK where they were. And the unfortunate thing about it is that the client had been warned. The client had been told. And the client kept it to himself. And the quite interesting thing, and Bain argues with me about this, was that was the first flight that we ever had there that didn't have an expat in it. It was only Turkish security and the pilot. And they did not shoot the front of the helicopter. They only shot the back where they knew the Turkish security would be sitting. And it was as if we had PKK on our drill crews, and the word was getting back what was happening, what was doing, and yeah, so that's the sort of thing. We hightailed it out there, finally got the compressors back. They left everything in the field. The client finally got the compressors back to us about a year later and shipped them to Pororua. And they'd been target practice while they'd been sitting out in the field as well. So this built up a hell of a lot of experience, all of this, of 2.2 million metres of seismic. It took us a lot of places around the world. Dominantly very difficult terrain, wide variety of near-surface lithologies, extreme climatic variations, diverse geographical locations. And a lot of this work came about because we had Antarctica on our CV and because a lot of our senior drillers had Antarctica on their CV. So it was all good. Geotechnical work, we got involved in the very early days of Transmission Gully and all the way through there and its various ramifications and phases, if you like. I don't know whether you know the story about Transmission Gully, but one of the first major contracts to get Transmission Gully in was they had to move the transmission line because it was going to be in the way. So they were all sitting there. It was a multi-million-dollar contract just to get rid of the transmission line and do the geotechnical drilling for where it was going to go, the new line was going to go and stuff like that. And then somebody said, where does this line go to? And it only went as far as Paraparam. And they said, well, why don't we just put an intersection into the Bunnythorpe Haywoods line and just feed Paraparam that way? And it took 3 pylons. That's all they had to do. And a couple of dragging clips, and the way the power went into Paraparams. I would have loved to have been at that meeting when somebody suggested that, and they all twigged that they didn't actually have to get rid of and build the new transmission line. They could just get rid of it. Anyway, so now we all, the benefits of Transmission Gully, I find it boring actually. It's I quite often go on the Paikokura Bay just for interest. Geotechnical, this is Tina River in the Solomon Islands. This was a Tasmanian hydro project actually, and it's just been taken over by the Chinese. And a lot of the groundwork years ago was just getting into the river and doing geotech work. Once again, the modularity of these rigs just they're really, really good for this sort of thing. Niger Delta, this is classic, this. That there is an upside down production platform. And these things were on 3 legs. And what they found was that when they first moved in there, they would spud the legs in. And in that particular instance, one of the legs decided to just keep on going. The other stopped on a reasonably firm substrate. And so the thing toppled over. That was 2.2 billion, I think, for that one. And this was all insurance company driven. The insurers then said, right, boys, if you're going to put these rigs up, or these production platforms up in the Niger Delta, we want to see some geotech done under each of the sites. And so that's what we did. We came along with one of our little wee rigs and just put them off the supply. There were supply rigs, smaller, they're called Hercules, and we'd put them in. And what would happen was there was a little wee CPT unit. This is a CPT, and it hydraulically presses into get really, really good strength data as you press these things in. But unfortunately, this thing's sitting in about 80 metres of water. And so you can imagine as you push down on it, the whole thing starts to bend. And so all we did was put one of our little rigs there. We'd slide it over the hole, run casing for them, take it down, slide our rig out of the way. They'd do their CPT within our casing that we had run. And this was another company out of England did that, and we went there. And the reason why we can do this is that we built those rigs so that they would fit inside a cargon of 737. If you can get something that fits inside of 737, you can get to most places in the world. Boeing 737. And so we built those rigs so they would break down and go inside. And that took us to so many places, all over the Pacific, Seychelles, Mozambique. Just being able to fly into these places in the 737 meant we could get our rigs there really quickly. We adapted the rigs to sit on barges. Mozambique, that was lovely. That was huge scallops, huge shrimps, prawns, and that was really, really good. That was for Port Nacala. Tanzania has some amazing resources, and they have to get iron ore, and to get it out, they were putting in in Mozambique, they were building a railway line, and that was they required a lot of geotech work for the construction of the loading terminal at Port Nacala. Scientific, I could go on and on and on about this. Lake Ohau was one of the really, really successful ones. We've had a few that haven't been so successful, I could tell you that. That is really, really good. And as I say, I could go on, but there's just so many. Lake Puterra, well, that was an interesting one. This is a lake up in the on the Wairoa Napier Road, Lake Puterra, and it has the most amazing record of storm events from the Papa, the mudstone area, just depositing into the lake in layers every time there's a major storm event. And there's probably a good layer in there right now, actually, from... and we had, it was an incredible, and that was run out of Massey University in Old Tuscany. And I remember that one quite distinctly because we went there and we had the most amazing problems with the stuff wasn't quite solidified enough. It was quite soft. And we had this core drape. As we pushed in, the core would just fall over essentially within the barrel. So we had to go away for a couple of weeks and develop another system. And yeah, it worked really successfully. Alpine fault, not so successful. A couple of reasons there. The science didn't get the overburden quite right. We thought there was only going to be about 60, 70 metres of gravels, but there ended up being a couple of hundred. And also one of the drillers dropped the casing one morning, which down the hole, which didn't go down very well. But what interests me about that one is they have the most amazing fibre optic cable going down that hole, and the amount of information they're getting out of it. And the science community always amazes me. They're always able to glean something really good out of something that wasn't quite as good. But anyway, no, the fibre optic cable, Lake Pukawa in the early days, Hawke's Bay, just going through the peats. Hunterville in the early days, Tim Nation, Richard, Siberia. There's some excellent, yeah, George, you're involved in that. Excuse me, Middlemarch, what's it called? That's right. The Middlemarch I see that's been protected now, yeah. Hawaii Deep, we did some deep drilling there for ICDP, and the Caldera workshop that we've just come from is another scientific one that will probably have quite a heavy involvement in as time goes on. Barrow Island, that was an amazing job, $60 billion development. Gorgon at that stage was had just been discovered offshore, but it's full of CO2, and on the way from Gorgon to land is the Barrow Island. It's been there for years, but it's a Class A nature reserve. It's a working production area in a Class A nature reserve. And so what they're doing there is stripping the CO2, pumping it down into the holes, and it's increasing the pressure in the Barrow Island field so they can get a few more years out of that. So that was really interesting because we had to make sonic rigs for that one because we weren't allowed to use water or compressed air because it was a Class A nature reserve. So yeah, and we utilised a New Zealand helicopter, the K-Max, with the counter-rotating rotors, which are starting to come back into favour. They can lift pretty much anything. ExxonMobil, the pipeline, after they discovered hides, they had to get the gas, after it went through conditioning, down a 300-kilometre pipeline to Kopi. 12.5 million US a day flows out the end of that pipeline. And so they spent a lot of money over a number of years getting that in. It's quite amazing working for these companies. They work well beyond political cycles, everything. These guys work, they're thinking 40 years hence, and with some of these major projects. And it's really interesting. We had river crossings to do. We were drilling at night and on roads and runways, and the little rigs were there. St Kitts and Nevis, beautiful spot. Set up on the beach, set up on the little ripples, and then the waves come in, and that's what happens to your rig. If you leave it there overnight, we couldn't get it off in time. And you can have trouble too in Papua New Guinea. The locals were a little bit restless one day and decided to set fire to a rig. I think that's still sitting there, that one. Once again, this was a case of the client not sort of being totally open with what was going on. A lot of anchoring, seismic strengthening around New Zealand. That's come into play a lot lately. Involves testing and long reach rigs. It's quite interesting, a lot of that. It's some of these shotcrete walls have a lot of anchors in behind it. The contract for Transmission Gully was immense. That was run by a local company, GeoVert, as well. GeoNet, I like this one. This is the GeoNet network that we're involved in. We put a lot of these deep braced monuments in. And what it is I'll just go, the The bottom bit of the anchor is in grout. It's grouted into the substrate. The top bit is free. We don't put any grout in there. There's there's a special foam that we put in there. So it gets away from any very near surface movements, freeze thaw, things like that in some of these situations. What it is once you get these things in, they pop a Trimble GPS system up on top there, and it's the most amazing science that I've ever come across, really. This Trimble starts pinging away, measuring its location on the Earth about every second or so, 2 seconds. And after about a week, it starts to get so accurate as to where it is, just through averaging all of its little pings, that they're getting down to sub-millimetre accuracy. Then they start comparing each one to the one over there that's on that hill and the one over there. And you build up some of these strain pictures and it's great bang for their bucks. It's great bang for the science bucks. I hate to say it, there's a lot of things like Andrew and stuff like that where there's money spent, but it quite often takes a number of years before the papers start coming. These guys are getting real quality data within a week and just plugging it in and getting some real sort of assistance in working out strain. And it's science really giving them, you get the data really quickly. Safety, we've been down this track, 35 years of experience, directors are involved, wide range. We've evolved with the Exxon Mobils of this world. Sometimes we're not that good, sometimes we are. But one thing about it is we've been flying around the world for donkey's years, explosives, everything the insurance companies hate to see on your declaration. And we've never had any problems or anything. A couple of broken legs in New Guinea, and that's been about it. And more recently, the Nova 1, we moved into the oil and gas sector. It's a rack and pinion rig, pretty heavy duty. The trouble in New Zealand was the rigs were about 40 years old. And this had a much smaller footprint than it had a much smaller footprint than the older rigs. And Bain took this on board, and he saw this more of a challenge rather than a need. But we went ahead and bought one of these and moved it in. This is when it was working for Apache over in the Wairarapa, the Wongai Shale. It's quite a massive oil shale reserve, has to be fracked, of course. And Apache actually moved out of New Zealand. So the Nova rig's still working away. It's just actually gone through 68 kilometres in total over a number of holes. So where to from here? Well, we're going to be involved in SWACE over on the Cam ice stream, probably one of the remotest places in the earth. The rig, working heavily with Darcy on that. This is going to be a game changer. If this all works in terms of its size and mobility, compared to the old Andrew rig, this will be really, really good. Reservations, which got a little bit more complex hydraulically over the last wee while, but no, I think we can do it. I'm pretty sure we can. Give it a crack, yeah. So what is the way forward for a company like us? What do we do with an oil rig? It's a pretty dirty word nowadays. Seismic's there. Well, we're looking at renewables and stuff like that, geothermal. We might sell it. Bain reckons we'll sell it. I don't know. We'll sell it. The UN, we'd love to get in. We've been working with the UN for a number of years. We had a contract with them on the Ethiopian-Eritrean border to put in some rock anchors for some pillars because they didn't want to locals being able to move the concrete pillars, which they would have done. They would have got bulldozers in there. So we were going to rock anchor these things, and we were just about to go in there, and the Ethiopians or the Eritreans, no, the Ethiopians threw their boys out of the cot, and that was the end of that one. We've been involved with the UN on a rapid reaction for drilling into what could be perceived to be radionuclide test sites. But yeah, the UN moves in mysterious ways sometimes, and whether it'd be nice to get into it, but I don't think it'll ever happen. Renewables, we're really starting to get into that. Getting that expertise, doing geotech work on offshore wind farms in Melbourne and will hopefully in New Zealand. That could be an area that we'll move into. Technology, CPT units, we sort of hummed and hard about that. CPT, continuous penetration testing. But it's like a lot of companies are doing that now, and yeah, we might move into that. And of course, the Antarctic work, we'll like to still be involved in that. I must say it is getting increasingly difficult to get people who want to go down there. It's a consequence, I think, of some of the money they earn on the oil side of things. And we all used to love going down there for 13 weeks and 10 weeks and stuff like that. Now these guys just, I can only go away for 4 weeks and all this sort of stuff. So that's going to be it's going to be interesting how that develops. Darcy will be working on that. Yeah. So that's about it, really. It's occasionally you forget something and leave it behind. So then you. So thank you very much. How's that for timing? How's that for timing?
That's great, Jeff.
Thank you.
Take a few questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some questions for Jeff. So,
How did you feel about the authority statement of the quality of soil?
Oh, it's a consequence. It's just a natural consequence of the way they operate. And also a little bit of a consequence of Tasmanian Hydro had been in there for years. And they were pissing around. And the Chinese, if they see they'll be in there very quick. And there's nothing wrong with what they're doing and that, but they'll take the advantage, and yeah, they'll get in there. We haven't. They're currently the major operator in seismic in New Guinea, and they're doing all right. They're doing all right in there, but yeah, people can go in there and work for 6 months and stuff like that. Yeah.
so yes.
You mentioned geothermal.
Yep.
Have you done much there?
Yes.
A lot of interest in that.
Oh yeah.
National research.
Yeah. We've done a couple of workovers for the Ngāti Whewharapua Trust. We think there's a sort of a little bit of an avenue there for getting in a fully electric rig and to do drill geothermal. Because a lot of these places have a power station nearby them. That's what the geothermal's there for. So yeah, put a little box over in the corner and we'll use your power to drill your hole for you and get away from the whole fossil fuel thing. Yeah. So yes, geothermal, definitely.
What's the advantage of using electrical for the car from the
It's
straightforward?
it's straight. Yeah, it's reasonably straightforward, but it's the sort of thing that looks really good on your third page of your annual report as well. And that's the reality of nowadays. it does look good for the lenders, for Westpac and people like that.
It's straightforward.
Yeah, reasonably free.
What about seawalls?
How about
Seawalls.
seawalls? Yeah.
That couldn't got that.
I really do. So it sometimes amazes me. We've been involved in the Petone to Nauranga walkway. And I know it's not just a walkway, cycleway, it's actually protecting the infrastructure, the road. And there has been instances in the past protecting the road and the rail. But you're sort of looking at 181 million. And that's before you've even really got going and started moving your little blue penguins and stuff like that. Yeah, but it is combined, but it's amazing what is being spent. Right.
Is there anyone else? Yes.
Come on, Robin, you can ask.
I was just reminding Peter, maybe quietly to acknowledge the Holmes Miller family, which is rather special to have here tonight.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And one of your members couldn't be here as well, so we should acknowledge that. So Jan and Dave Fullerton, yes, Jen's Bob's daughter. And also mention that we'll be going and having dinner together, several of us here, and there's still one or two places if others would like to join us. So, it's an opportunity to do that. Well,
I might shout a few bottles of wine.
in which case, I think we should thank Jeff. Look, really, everybody should. Thank you. A lot of stories, I'm sure there could be a lot more stories, but you'll have to come to dinner and find out. So look, thank you all. You've been a great audience and it's a really good experience and it's all captured on YouTube. So you can relive it. Thanks all.